The Fly is considered one of the best remakes of all time, as well as one of the best horror movies of the 1980s. Now, most of this comes down to the fact that it's actually very different from a lot of other horror movies, with one thing in particular making it stand out from the rest of the crowd, and that's its ability to make the audience leave the theater crying their eyes out instead of recovering from a heart attack like most horror movies try to do. But before I go any further, I would just like to give a disclaimer that there will be spoilers ahead for this movie and a few others I mention. So just please be on the lookout if there's something you don't want spoiled. This is the only time I will be giving this disclaimer. Okay, so to backtrack a bit, what separates The Fly from a lot of other horror movies, and even some more conventional movies, is its depiction of humanity. Because if you take a look often enough, most movies depict humanity as the real villain or monster over something, be it a creature, person, or even an unseen force, who outwardly looks menacing and threatening, but is actually very nice and harmless. And an excellent example of this would be Edward Scissorhands. And while the beautiful tragedy of it is honestly brilliant and may even deserve a video of its own someday, for right now, let's just stick to the fact that ultimately humans are depicted as the evil ones, while the weird but very nice and loving Edward ends up being forced to hide from them in order to protect his own existence. All because we have such a hard time accepting things that we don't understand or don't know much about. And I'm definitely not saying that the movie's wrong about that, because we've done stuff like that, and much worse, all throughout human history. So, in all honesty, it's a lesson that must be taught, and a message that must be sent if we're ever going to learn. But to get back on topic, my point is that while that moral is a very important one that shouldn't be understated, it's one that can be overdone just for the sake of shock value. Now, Edward Scissorhands definitely used this the right way, but a lot of other movies don't, especially in the horror genre. Now, again, there are exceptions to this, such as the original Frankenstein movies, which get this point across very effectively. But just like with anything else that's overdone, more often than not, it's not used in a story as well as it could be. And that's what makes The Fly so effective. Because not only does it take a completely different approach on the man and monster archetype, but it does it perfectly. Because unlike most other stories of this nature, humanity not only doesn't turn out to be the real monster, but is portrayed as almost an ideal state of being that a creature with any semblance of knowledge of would do anything to achieve. Because by the end of the movie, Seth Brundle is so desperate to regain his lost humanity that he's willing to go to some rather unorthodox and questionable methods to get it back. And when you see what kind of physical and mental condition he's in at that point, can you really blame him? I mean, I'm not saying that makes what he was planning on doing right, just that it's easy to understand where he's coming from. Because this movie understands the dynamic between man and animal. It understands the difference between them. A lesser writer or director might have tried to portray Brundlefly as a misunderstood creature while the humans set out to destroy him, or just have him go completely savage at the climax and go on a killing spree, having completely lost his humanity and identity to the fly. But instead, this movie goes about depicting such a merger realistically, and that's why it works so well. Because the humans aren't even portrayed as perfect or anything like that. Strathus, and please forgive me if I'm not saying that right, I've always had a problem with that name, is rather rude and a borderline stalker who can't take no for an answer, Veronica openly admits she's lazy, and Seth can't communicate with people too well. But the thing is, it's all portrayed as better than living like an animal, which I believe anybody can admit is absolutely true. Because while the movie doesn't overlook people's flaws, it does ultimately portray us as better off than anything else living on this planet out there. As Seth's mind is consumed by the fly, we see how it destroys him emotionally and psychologically, to the point that he'll do anything to get back what he now considers to be a paradise. And it's something that we all take for granted. Simply just being human and being able to think like one. And at the same time, his transformation also brings out the best in the other characters instead of the worst, as Veronica stands by and tries to help any way she can when she could have easily ran away after finding out what happened to him. And Strathis shows himself to be a good person deep down as well, owning up to his behavior and mistakes, and provides the emotional support that she desperately needs. But it's really in the early parts of the movie, which depict Seth and Veronica's romance, that this is best illustrated. Because rather than just the barbaric, insatiable mating of animals, humanity is shown to have a lot more when it comes to that. From the deep emotional connections to the genuine love and enjoyment that comes with such an act. And there's a brilliant contrast in this from when they first make love and it being portrayed as a wonderful and extremely fulfilling experience to a much more instinctual and unpleasant one once he merges with the fly and starts caving to his natural inclinations more and more. And by portraying the characters this way, it becomes a lot more about the tragedy rather than the scares. And that's what helps make it work so well. Instead of just being a typical slasher movie where a bunch of random people are just killed in creative and gory ways by some monster, we get to know the characters and thus really sympathize with their struggles, especially Seth, because he goes from being a really likable, harmless, and nerdy scientist to being consumed by a horrible disease that wreaks havoc on his sanity, and thus can perfectly understand his desperate but ultimately futile desire to find a cure, all because he wants to regain his humanity. Again, what makes it brilliant is that anybody can relate to that, as well as the fear of having some savage animal or disease take over our mind and try to destroy everything that makes us individuals in the first place. Now, to start to wrap this up, I think that all of this is actually perfectly explained right in the film with Seth's insect politics speech. That basically humanity is far from perfect, but better than anything in the animal kingdom. Because while people may hate politics and politicians, at least it's humanity's way of trying to be civilized, orderly, and compromising. Now, again, it doesn't always work, but at least we're capable of trying to be nice and going against our barbaric roots. Animals, and insects in particular, aren't able to do that, though. All they know is instinct, survival, and kill, kill, kill anything that's a threat or too weak to fight back. And that's what gives us our humanity, our ability to feel compassion and understanding towards our fellow people. And when we embrace it, the world can truly be a pretty nice place to live in. And when Seth starts to lose that, it's portrayed as the ultimate tragedy and something worth trying to get back, though not at the expense of somebody else, obviously. Basically, what makes The Fly so different is that it portrays things in nature the way they are. That humanity, while far from an ideal, is still a lot better and closer to an ideal than anything else out there, instead of depicting us as the evil ones to the hybrid Brundlefly. No, instead, he's rightly shown to have gone insane because of the fly's instincts taking over his mind, and that in the end, there's really only one escape for him. And even in that, the movie shows how strong humanity can be. Because even after seemingly losing everything to the fly, Brundle is still able to overcome all of his survival instincts to ask to be killed. And even in that, the movie is rightly showing the good side to humanity. Because not only does she do it out of compassion, but because he still had what no animal can have: free will. In the end, humans can make choices, and that's what can make us so great or horrible. Because unlike animals, we can choose what we'll do when it comes to ourselves and others. And keeping with this theme, in the end, even if it's in the most tragic way possible, humanity ends up winning over the monster because he still has the free will to ask to be freed of his suffering. And as you can probably see, that's what makes this movie such a far cry from other horror movies. Because it depicts humanity as liberating to the monster and not the other way around. And when you really think about that, that portrayal might just be a lot closer to real life than some people would give it credit for. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to say. So now you tell me, do you think The Fly's depiction of humanity and actually putting it in a good light is what helps make it so remarkable? Or do you believe that I'm dead wrong and that there are other reasons for it being such a great movie? Please feel free to let me know in the comments. And just as I said, you can disagree with me wholeheartedly if you want to. I'm only here to have a discussion with all of you, nothing else. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.